Welcome to Roll for Crit. Today we are previewing a game called SHASN AZADI. SHASN is a political board game, and AZADI is the follow-up / successor that's on Kickstarter right now, builds off of much of the same framework as the original game, while also adding in a whole bunch of new rules and components. The premise here is that everyone is trying to overthrow the current government, and then once that is taken care of, you're going to need to decide who is going to be the new leader and what ideology you're going to have going forward.
On your turn, the person next to you is going to have this fun little box where they'll draw a card from without showing you and ask you a question. Now, these questions will sound things like, should we use the railroads used by the previous British rulers, to things that may be still modern today. They will tell you the yes-no responses, but they will not show you what the rewards and what ideology they're tied to. You will choose which one you think best suits you, or maybe whatever moves you need to make, and you will get the rewards on that card. So in this case, you would get 2 of the green resources as well as the yellow resources. The yellow being trust, green being funds. And you'll add them to your board. You will also add the card underneath your board, tucking it to the side of the ideology that you chose. Now, there are 4 possible combinations: capitalist, supremo, showstopper, and idealist. Each one sort of obviously leaning a certain way, but they also give you some pretty good power-ups. First off, regardless of the color, once you have 2 of these tucked into any of the colors, you just get one of those resources at the start of your turn. So that's a good way to sort of start building up those resources. Next, each of them have a unique power at 3 and at 5. For example, the capitalist, once you have 3 capitalist cards, allows you to trade in any one resource for 2 other ones. So it's a good way to color fix if you need to, or just get one more resource. So of course, sometimes you'll be answering what you believe in, but maybe sometimes you really need that other answer. You may have to bend your values in order to maybe get what you need in order to advance farther.
Once you've resolved that ideology card and received the resources that you need for that turn, that you get depending on what your answer was, then you get to take as many actions as you want in any order that you wish, assuming that you have the resources to pay for them or that they make sense depending on your current situation. A lot of those actions are going to revolve around the primary board right here. As you can see, it is modular, and depending on the number of players as well as how the game progresses, it's going to look a little bit different probably each time you sit down to play. Each of these are different voting zones that you can place your own voters, depending on your player color, into in order to try to influence those regions. There's also these white ones, which are Imperial voters. They're sort of like an NPC faction that's not controlled by any of the players. They're just there to mess everybody's day up equally. By the way, this is all prototype components, so keep that in mind as you're looking at it. This is not final materials or colors or anything like that necessarily. So the important thing about these zones is getting majority in them. So you need to hit the number printed here. For example, in this zone, you'll need at least 9 in order to get majority. If you do, you get to flip those voters to the other side to indicate that, mostly just so it's clear to everybody you have majority. They know exactly what's going on in any given region. Now, you can't just place voters in there right away. You're going to have to influence some voters first and then decide where you're going to allot them. You influence them by purchasing these cards up here. There's always going to be 3 from this deck face up, and they have a cost in resources as you have on your board. If you can spend that much, then you take that card, you get the voters, you discard the card, and as another action, then you can place them. Now, they have to go into the same space. So if this gave you 2, you could add 2 to any one of those zones. Now, it might be kind of hard for you to get majority depending on what's going on. So one thing you can do is form an alliance, or they call it a coalition, with another player. If both of you agree to this, then you can actually combine forces. So for instance, over here, these 2 player colors together do add up to the 11 required to form a majority. So that's something that you might want to do if you think it's beneficial to you in the moment. If you have majority, then there's another action that you have the opportunity to use, gerrymandering. In this case, you get to choose any one voter in one of the regions that you're in and move them to an adjacent region. So it could be someone else else's, could be your own, but maybe you want to spread your influence to somewhere else, or you're afraid that somebody is starting to get too many people there. You just want to kick them out to go someplace else. There's also these resistance cards that will come into play over the course of the game in a region. They'll give you different special abilities that you can activate if you meet their requirements, if you so choose while you're there. One of the big reasons that having majorities is so important is because by the time you get to the end of the game, you're going to score points for each voter you have in a majority region. So if you were this player at the end of the game, you would get 7 points because you have 7 there. That is the minimum number. You meet that majority requirement. So that's one of the big ways you're going to want to score points if you want to win the game.
Before we even get to that point, though, we have to go over those Imperial voters and the Imperials that are currently ruling. If you haven't guessed, they don't feel like giving up power so easily. So you're going to have to be fighting them and maybe working with your fellow players before they officially become opponents. The first thing you need to worry about are those ideology cards I brought up earlier, the ones which ask you a question. See, they're also your clock. For in the deck when you prepare, depending on number of players, there's a little tab saying your voice has been silenced. Pretty much if you take too long, the Imperial army just stops you. So you're going to have to make sure you don't just drag your feet. You're going to have to learn to work together. The other thing is they have this fun little board over here. Now, usually they're not doing much if they see you squabbling over areas because they're not a threat. But once someone hits a majority in an area for the first time or enters one of these zones with the squares, you're going to draw an AZADI card. They look like this. They're actually like little booklets, and they're actually major historical events. Whoever triggered it is going to take 2, choose one that they like. So, for example, we'll take this one, divide and rule. You'll read the top, have some flavor text, and then there's first a followed action. That's a one-time bad effect. Then there is an order. It's pretty much the Imperials putting out a very tyrannical rule. Now, you can try to fight it back through dissent. It has a limit. This case is 9. Each player is going to secretly choose a number from 0 to 5 and say they're going to dissent that much. You're going to point it into the board, cover it. Once everyone reveals, they'll show what they put in. If they're able to hit 9 or more, they beat the rule and the rule will not go into play. If they don't, it's going to be in play as long as this card's in play. What dissent is this board up here. You start with always up to 5, and whenever you dissent, you'll move it up. Pretty much, it's a punishment you're going to have. For in this case, you can only buy 1 voter card, even if you had all the resources, and so on and so forth. But let's say you're able to spend this cost down here. You actually move the dissent down, freeing it up and giving you glory. That is used over here in the glory marketplace and is pretty much people rewarding you for making the sacrifice to fight the Imperials. Now, whether the dissent worked or not, you're then going to open up the AZADI card. Pretty much you have 2 options to deal with the problem. One of them is the actual course history took. The other one is more of what if. They have different rules, but usually they're doing things such as placing voters or maybe moving things around, and they give an extra rule to help you do that in addition to what may appear on the board. You're going to add these legacy tokens on here, and when all of them are removed, that's the side that happens. So in this case, if all the yellow were removed before the red, that's what's going to happen in history. This is when the Empire gets very angry. For you see, at the end of each player's turn, this crown moves over 1. Now, usually, like I said, it doesn't do anything because they don't care. But once this is put underneath the board, you see this times 2, you have to do that many times something in that column. And they'll do things like adding their own voters, taking out voters, maybe forcing you to make voters more expensive. It's something you're going to have to be worried about. And these only get stronger because as you unlock your own powers, they're going to be able to do more things and punish you more. So you're going to have, even if you increase your own strength, they're going to be able to counter you. Once though you finish, like I said earlier, one side, you flip this over, move it over to the side here. And once you complete a number equal to whatever the difficulties chose and number of players, you get to choose the final one. Now, the way the final one works is it looks at every player on the board and see what were the most ideology cards chosen during the question phase. So let's say hypothetically that there were 10 cards in total among the players for Supremo, and then second most was the Idolist at maybe 8. You're then going to look for the card that has the majority in the red and the second majority in the yellow. And that tells you what the future, the soul of your country now is going to look like. Unlike the previous ones, there's no bad thing you have to read on the top. You just simply open it and try to complete one of the things. Once you do, you have a new rule in play and you've officially overthrown the Imperial army. This is where things get a little tricky, because once that big enemy's gone, well, the only people left to fight are the other people at the table. So all Imperial board pieces, the voters, the board are gone. And what's left is you flip over the capital, because you've now gained access to the capital, and you will continue to fight, adding voters until every place has majority of someone. Then, as Jonathan stated earlier, you'll count up your vote, the majority voters, see who has the most points, and you were the one who successfully led the revolution.
As you can tell, this is a political game, both in mechanics and very much so in its theme as well. And we have not played the original SHASN, so we jumped right into the AZADI version of it, which from what I can tell is expanded quite a bit. There's a lot more going on in this one. A lot of the stuff that we talked about isn't present in the original, but the framework seems to be pretty much the same. And yeah, if you are someone who is interested in the political themes, this is a game that's very much about real world situations, real world issues, and allowing you as the players to take into your own hands how you deal with those things, whether it be from your own like moral perspective, or as we said, just what you think is going to help you get the victory at the end of the game.
Yeah, there are a lot of interesting things. It is centered around India, in case you're curious where most of these events are taking place. And generally, I feel like there's plenty of games that are just a Kickstarter. Let's ask a question. How will you answer it? And it's usually just a party game. But this makes it, it's actually a game mechanic, because sometimes you'll be like, well, yeah, I think this should happen, but the other answer sounds like Showstopper, for example, and I need another card there. So I'm going to go that. You might have to bend your own questions for the game mechanic and stuff, which I think actually makes sense. And obviously the territory control is very interesting, because you are fighting off this Imperial army. They are going to make everyone lose if you can't beat them. But through just your own thing, and even the way they act, because you technically control them at the end of your turn when they trigger stuff. So if they remove voters, you're going to be like, I'm sorry, Jonathan, I'm just going to take your voters away,
Yeah. There's plenty of ways to interact with each other. And it is very much, in addition to its political nature, a territory control game. That's a lot of the focus of it for sure. And you're also worrying about it's a little bit like set collection. Like you said, you are acting as a politician in a lot of ways. So you're trying to figure out what's going to make people happy. Does that sound more like a capitalist thing that I want to do, because I'm already leaning that way? Or maybe I want to try get some influence in a different area because I need to compete with somebody else's influence in that type of voter. So you really do think in a lot of those ways. And I do think this game is, there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to understand in this. There's a lot of moving parts and components, and a lot of different actions that you can do on your turn. But for the most part, a lot of them are relatively specific, I would say, and they're very situational. And the flow of the game, once you get your head around it, once you understand most of the rules, the turns go relatively quickly, at least early on. The more that you go and the more resources people start developing, then you're going to have a lot more options on your turn. And by the end of the game, it will be a little more intense trying to figure out exactly how you can take out these different regions and make them your own.
Yeah, the set collecting isn't simply for points. It's almost engine building, I would say, is probably a good way to view it, because once you get a lot of these, you're going to get a lot of free things, no matter how you answered it. You're also going to be able to maybe switch some things, move people around. So the first few turns, maybe you have only one or two things you can do. But because you're not limited by action points, when it comes to closer to the end, you're going to be like, all right, do this, then this, then this, then this, which lets me do this and this. So it can be really fun if you sort of like that comboing. And the other thing I think is, I think there are other games that might do it, but not nearly as much, is a territory game where it doesn't involve armies.
Yeah, right.
You're not actually fighting each other literally. It is much more of that subversive choosing people, and like the gerrymandering, moving people around to, like, you might not simply just go for a majority. You might be like, I'm going to move you here because now you're fighting with the other player, and then you two are going to fight over that place. and I can just watch.
Yeah. There's no combat phase or anything like that. It's just about your voters and making sure they're in the right place at the right time, and worrying about not just other players, but also, again, the Imperial board over there and what things they're going to be doing on your turn. You're going to have to take that into account at the end of each turn. And it probably goes without saying, but if you couldn't tell, for a game political like this in nature, it definitely lends itself to larger groups, or at least medium-sized groups, so that you're able to do things like make those deals, those coalitions, or trade resources, which is another thing you can do on your turn, is make little trades with people if there's a certain voter card you really want that you think would be mutually beneficial for the both of you. So there's a lot of different head games and intrigue and political negotiation tactics you can employ in an experience like this.
There is a lot going on in this game. Like, we even barely touched over how legacy tokens can help you get different monuments or interact with the crown and stuff. The board shapes are going to be different depending on what people choose to put in play, depending on how people draft and different questions come out. So you're going to have a very different political experience each time. Of course, this is on Kickstarter right now. You can go down below to check out the Kickstarter page and back it if you are interested.
Yeah, that link is in our description. And while you're down there, you can go ahead and comment on this video and let us know what you think about AZADI, and if you have played the original SHASN, what your thoughts are on either version of the game. My name is Jonathan.
I'm Will.
And this was Roll for Crit. Do us a favor, like this video, subscribe to our channel, or if you really like us, you can support us on Patreon. Become a high roller today for exclusive bonus content. We also have a podcast now. You can check that out at rollforcrit.com/podcast. Weekly episodes with special guests you definitely want to listen to.